So that we can have a timely program and give our speaker as much time as we can. My name is Nita Couchman. I'm the president of the Orcas Island Garden Club, and I want to welcome everyone to our program today. We're excited to see Emily's photographs and hear what she has to say about planting, to learn some things, and to get a little inspiration for our spring planting, which I know we're all just chomping at the bit to get going with. So thank you for coming in, and I'll turn the mic over to Dixie.
Good morning, everyone. Boy, I don't know about you, but I certainly am happy that spring is on its way. Let's see. Okay, so this Saturday, we have 2 programs this month. And this Saturday, Kristen Pfeiffer is going to talk about drought-resistant landscaping, 10 o'clock. You all should have the link to that. And then just kind of a little heads up, a plug for our May plant sale in conjunction with the Lopez School Garden, May 7th from 10 until 2. What I'm asking you to do for us today is start your start. So we need a huge inventory to sell, and it's going to be lots of fun. You'll be hearing a lot about the Lopez Garden Club. We have some fun summer activities planned. So this morning, let's sit back and enjoy Emily's presentation.
I'm Lena Symes, and I'm delighted that Emily's going to be talking to us this morning, and that I have the opportunity to introduce her. Just a few things before we get started, the housekeeping kinds of things. For your best viewing and listening experience during the presentation, please keep your personal mic muted and turn off your personal video, and then select speaker view. Use the chat feature to submit comments or questions. Emily is going to answer and respond to those after she's finished her presentation, but you can submit them anytime that you're going through, and our wonderful and very much appreciated librarian, Carol DePogny, is going to monitor chat and will ask questions at the end and organize the questions to ask at the end. I just want to acknowledge Holly King, who isn't with us, but another one of our librarians, and she does the editing of the recordings for us. So I'm very grateful to the support we receive from the library. And now I'm very pleased to introduce Emily Aring. Emily is the owner of the KaBloom Landscape Design. Among KaBloom's projects was designing and installing the Orcas Public Library landscaping. And about that, Emily wrote, the project called for an elegant natural design that would echo the powerful native ecosystem while bringing a sense of the cultivated civilization that a library represents. I'm very much looking forward to hearing more of her thoughts about gardens and design. Emily, welcome.
Thank you so much, Lena. And thank you so much to the Orcas and Lopez Garden Clubs for inviting me to speak with you all today. I'm just thrilled to wax on about gardening and the landscape that we live in here on Orcas Island. And I love that I'm speaking with all of you fellow gardeners in the San Juan Islands who really understand what it is to garden here. It's a very special place, and it's got its unique challenges and unique, wonderful things. And I know I'll be preaching to the choir when I am just going on and on about how wonderful it is here. So I've got a few things to say before I start the actual slideshow. The first thing is that I have to do a couple of shout outs. The first one, both of Garden Club members, the first one being Hazel O'Brien, who is no longer with us physically, but she's very much alive in my heart, and I'm sure in many of yours. She was a client and dear friend of mine, and I adopted her kitty, Quinoa, who's here keeping me company while I give this talk. And the second shout out is to Margaret Payne. Margaret really made it possible for me to have that landscaping job at the library. And it really launched my design practice in a whole different way, and gave me a canvas to really start practicing what I had been studying for many years and building up to. And I will just be ever thankful to you, Margaret, for that. So, bit to say before I start the slides. My goal in this talk is to discuss landscape design on Orcas Island, what my practice is, how I go about it, how I see things, how I do things, tell you a story of a specific design installation that happened this last fall, and hopefully to leave you with some tools to maybe use in your own home landscapes. I think the talk should last about a half hour, and then I'd love to do question and answers at the end. And there are many side roads we could go down when discussing the many aspects of doing a landscape design and installing a garden. So I don't want to just drone on and on about everything and get distracted. So I'm going to try to stay on my story, and then we can go down rabbit holes later. So there are so many ways to be a gardener, and there are about as many ways to be a gardener as there are to be a human being, I think. You could be crazy about natives, you could be crazy about medicinals, you could be crazy about growing food, you could be crazy about roses, you could be a tidy gardener, you could be a wild gardener, you could, there's just the whole gamut, and everything's great. And I have my particular lenses that I look through, and I wanted to share the three primary, there are many, and I wanted to share my three primary lenses that I look through as I create gardens. The first one is structural and compositional. And I see myself as kind of a botanical architect. My job is to build outdoor spaces for people that are made of plants. Of course, we shape the ground as well, but really the spaces, the living spaces that I'm creating are made of plants. And so, plants, besides just being the creatures that furnish our outdoor living spaces, they solve all kinds of problems. They enhance good views, they block bad views, they hold up space at the bottom of the hill where your view falls down into the road, they soften corners, they mark transitions, they do all kinds of jobs for us, structurally speaking. So, and then compositionally, on top of the structural level, I'm always composing using texture and color and form and shape and size and height. And they're just endless playing to do with compositions. So that's the first lens, structural and compositional. The second primary lens is ecological. I really, really do see all of the living creatures around us as our friends. And I think it's my job to take care of them as well. So I'm really building gardens for every living creature that's living in them. And so I'm really all about creating biodiversity. And of course, there are all the things we can do specifically to Orcas, which, like using plants that don't need a lot of water, and plants that are deer resistant, and so that they can live to actually provide habitat and food and resources for all the other creatures beside deer, and humans that are trying to live here. And all the while being incredibly beautiful without a fence, without the need for a fence. Which brings me to my third lens, which is an existential one. There's a reason we all chose to live in these islands, as challenging as it can be. The landscape that we're living in is so powerful, and it's so alive, and its wildness, its spirit is intact. And while fences are great for keeping out deer and for giving us a sense of enclosure when we need it, sometimes it feels a little sad to have to fence out this beautiful landscape that we're in. And so I'm really all about integrating our home landscapes into the larger landscape that we live inside of. And for me, this third lens is an existential one, because we all know as gardeners how much joy and health plants bring us and gardens bring us. You just can't help but feel better by being in a beautiful garden or a beautiful natural place. And so my real, how I see my job is that I'm bringing an exuberance of life into people's intimate outdoor environments and nesting those environments inside of the larger environment in which we live. So those are my three primary lenses. Now let's get started with the slideshow. Uh-oh, now I can't maneuver. Hang on. Technical help. Screen sharing.
I think probably Carol's going to be the best source of technical help.
Okay.
Are you on your laptop? And are you trying to go to the next
laptop?
And if you go into PowerPoint or Keynote, whichever one you're using, you hit the play button already, right?
I did.
And then if you use your arrow keys, do they take you to the next screen?
Yeah, the arrow keys aren't working.
I would go ahead and go back into PowerPoint or Keynote, and I would get back to the normal screen and then hit play again if you can.
Okay, let me see. Oh, well, something worked.
What if it's
Okay.
just a lag?
Maybe there's a lag. I'm just going to keep going and hope for the best.
Alrighty.
Okay, so I'm going to tell a little bit of a story about me, where I started, so that you know where I'm coming from. My journey into being a landscape designer started in Brooklyn, where I was born. That's a picture of me when I was 7, leaning against a little tree that my parents planted out in front of our brownstone. And we lived in a neighborhood of like spans of blocks that were all composed of brownstone buildings. And the architecture was exactly the same. But one of my first observations about the world was, hey, on the wealthy streets, there are gigantic trees, but on the not wealthy streets, there are small spindly trees. But wait, trees are free. Trees don't cost money. What's that about? And so I really started noticing plants in their relative scarcity in the city. And it's kind of fun that I wound up out here where, their buildings are surrounded by nature, and here, here buildings are surrounded by nature, but there, nature sort of adorned buildings. So that was my start of how I came to start noticing plants. Okay. After leaving Brooklyn, my parents moved us to the coast of New England, where I wound up studying biology with a marine concentration. And I moved out to the Pacific Northwest expecting to be practicing marine biology, but I just got captivated by the landscape and the plants out here. And I really needed art in my life. And I decided I'm not going to do marine biology. I'm going to get into landscape gardening is what I'm going to do. And I felt so much joy from getting my hands into the soil and learning about plants that I started working for somebody else. And then I took courses at Edmonds Community College, which has a really awesome ornamental horticulture program. And there I learned all the different species of all the cultivated landscape plants that do well in our ecoregion and what their needs were. And that was it. I was sold. And then I moved to Orcas Island, and Orcas was a place that really started to teach me that nature is the best designer. These are some scenes from Orcas on Turtleback. Look at the composition, the way the land slopes, the trees are arcing up in their vertical and spreading patterns, the way the boulders are cropping out of the ground and the grasses are softening it. It's just so beautiful. And then on upper right, you see the digitalis that are going to start sprouting anytime soon in Moran. This is at Mountain Lake in that one grove.
This is Helen.
And then below that is another scene
Hi,
from
good morning.
Moran. The misty trunks, with the mossy ground, with the decomposing. It's just, you just can't get more beautiful than that. So I started professionally gardening here on Orcas about 20 years ago, and I've just been studying the entire time. Continuing on in the Pacific Northwest, this is another example of nature being just the most incredible artist. This picture was taken from the Mount Baker Wilderness area where I did a backpacking trip a couple of years ago. And you just can't get better than this. The drama, the color, the composition, the complexity, but the simplicity at the same time. It's just amazing. So really the School of Nature has been my primary teacher in design, along with some other teachers that I'll mention later. But I really do feel that this naturalistic design feels appropriate to Orcas, especially in fenceless gardens where you have no structural frame to frame your view. And so in my practice, I really aim to mimic natural plant patterns using cultivated plants that are appropriate to our ecosystem. And I use planting patterns to bring civilized zones into conversation with the wildness around us. I hope that makes sense to you guys. And so to me, bringing these natural patterns into our intimate home landscapes really serves the purpose of uniting our homes with the landscape around us. Linking back to my title of my talk, landscapes within landscapes, it's all nested. We're nested inside of something much bigger. And the last thing I'll say about this little subject is that it is about the plants we use, but it's just as much about the patterns we use them in that make them feel right. Here's some more natural patterns untouched by human hands that are just incredibly beautiful. The one on the left is another picture from that same hike in the Mount Baker Wilderness. This is at the bottom of a scree pile on a mountaintop, and you've got sedges and huckleberries and lupin and heather. And then on the upper right, common scene coming up from Turtleback with nettle and miner's lettuce and cleavers and just a beautiful tumble of green, lush growth. And then you've got, of course, the sword ferns, which are artfully arranged never having been touched by a human hand. Let's see. I'm going to bring up some pictures of the library right now to talk about grasses as a really wonderful tool for creating naturalistic design. Grasses are amazing. If I can leave you with one tool, it is to plant more grasses. Grasses, I could just go on and on about them. They move in the breeze. They unite disparate plants. They create a horizontal plane that is covering the actual ground. So the soil is shaded and there are habitats created beneath and around the grasses that are really advantageous to our soils. Deer never touch them. They don't need a lot of water. They don't need a lot of fertility. And if you plant a sea of grasses, you can have all kinds of cool perennials rising up out of them that make their seed heads in the winter. And you can plant some shrubs and some conifers. And before you know it, you have a beautiful naturalistic garden. And it's pretty easy to take care of. Grasses, many grasses do need to be cut back once a year, and that can be a messy job, but it's worth it, in my opinion. So everybody should plant some grasses. Okay, what else do I need to say about this? Nothing. Okay. Here's some more of my gardens. On the left, I call this a forest floor planting. You know, this is an alternative to the sort of the meadowy, scapey, open, sunny ground that you saw at the library. This is up on Gear Lane in East Sound. This is a fenceless garden, but you can see that you can create lushness and texture and a really beautiful feeling up close. And it's a view that kind of, it feels united with the distant views. And so you can see in this garden, let's see, we've got a whole bunch of different ferns. We've got a carex grass. We've got a little midge, Muschimensis carex, those little fuzzy mounds. We've got some bamboo. I've got an Edgeworthia chrysantha planted on the left, a bunch of hellebores, all kinds of wonderful plants in here. Some conifers. I like to bring in conifers in the foreground to pull in the far elements in. And so you kind of can't even tell what the conifers were that I planted versus what I didn't. So that's fun. In the upper right picture, you can see the bottom of a hillside looking up toward that same house that was in the picture. So the same house from the picture on the left is now seen from below here. And this is taken from the road. And I love to use pines as architectural plants to sort of really fill empty spaces. Because before I planted those, the view went straight down into the road and just fell down the hill. And these trees really create a beautiful blockage for that. And they're interplanted with some taller miscanthus grass and some taller cistus and heathers at their bases. Actually, those are heaths, not heathers. And then below that picture is another garden up on Gear Lane. That's just near and dear to my heart. It's my first ever ground cover lawn. And you can see all the grasses in there. This was a winter picture. They're just beautiful all year round. So let's see what else is next. Okay, here comes the story I'm going to bring you through. This is a project I'm really excited about, excited to share with you because it's a real transformation. And the wonderful client, Linda Sheldall, has said it's okay to use her name. Just a wonderful woman here on Orcas. She had recently finished a remodel on her beautiful waterfront home. And she called me up and said, what can we do with this? I really want to enjoy my outdoor space, and I want to be able to sit out here and just be in a garden. And what do we got here? And I was like, wow, this is a real blank canvas. Emphasize the word blank. And, I got to say, this is actually a fairly common scenario on Orcas, where after construction of a home, construction's happening on really fragile soils, often on the water, but oftentimes not. And construction equipment, it just compacts and just kind of kills all the soil structure. And then you've got things like rather clunky utilitarian walls being built, retaining walls of big boulders that just aren't to scale to an intimate garden. And so you've got this real barren feeling, barren blank feeling. And even if Linda was trying to plant things in her soil, but nothing was growing. And so, while the house is in this beautiful, beautiful place, it just you didn't feel pretty outside. And it didn't feel inviting, even though there was a fair amount of really nice room to use. So this was a really great opportunity, and I'm going to walk you through our process and how we transformed it. And let me just go to my page. Okay. So this process did require heavy equipment. This was not a DIY situation. And I want to say, I'm not expecting you guys to bring in heavy equipment, although if you have the gumption to, go for it. And maybe some of this can help you feel encouraged in doing that for yourselves. But anyway, so here we go with the story. Before we start there, I'm going to show you a few more pictures. You can see how tight the ground was. It was just hard packed, dry. Nothing was growing. You can see the space was just kind of blank. And so here we go. Working from the back corner. First things first, we had to bring in the heavy equipment. And I have to do a shout out here to the wonderful Randy Pence of Advanced Construction and Excavation, who was my partner in crime on this project, and more going forward. It's very exciting. He uses that excavator like his hand, and he very delicately but firmly broke up those subsoils for us as per best practices as recommended by Linda Chalker Scott, who was another speaker to you guys, using this book. I know that we need to break up compacted subsoils so that water and roots and nutrients can move into the lower levels of the soil and allow plants to really get their roots down deep and be sustainable long term. So we had to work starting in the back corner and then paint our way out toward the driveway. And so we started here. This is Randy digging up, decompacting the subsoils. And then we
hi,
brought
this is Linda from Island Primary Care. I'm one of the nurses here. Not Island Primary Care, the UW triage nurse. Excuse me.
Hello? Okay, I'm just going to keep going.
I think she was muted.
I hope everybody's okay. Okay, so we also had to bring in many boulders. This is another primary feature of how I build the ground. We use a lot of boulders to retain slopes because we're always dealing with slopes on Orcas. There's just always hillsides to be retaining. And you really need to hold up the soils. And also, I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but plants seem to grow better when there are rocks around them. I think there are many reasons for this. I won't go into it right now, but boulders serve many purposes in a garden. So we brought in a lot of rocks. next step, you can start to see our construction of beds in this back zone with boulders kind of protruding out of them and holding them up. And we created at least a foot of depth of, cultivated subsoils, then add a layer of a 50-50 mix of topsoil with Nutrimulch that I did get from San Juan Sanitation. And on the subject of soils, this is a major rabbit hole. I would love to discuss this in depth after the talk. If you guys want to talk about soils, I will say I'm always learning. I always want to do better. And I'm striving to use local soils going forward because for many reasons. And I'm about to collaborate on a project with Michael Budnick of Native Landscapes, who's a huge wealth of knowledge about soils. And I'm really anxious to learn from him. So, but for this project and up till now, we've had great success. We did this at the library where we used a mix of Nutrimulch and screen topsoil, both gotten from San Juan Sanitation, to create our topsoils. And we aim to create about a foot of depth. And the idea is to create a pretty fertile topsoil to plant into at first, amend with a mesophilic alfalfa pellet compost, which I will talk about later, to introduce a lot of microbial activity into the soil, which is really key for root health. And then plant the landscape plants in there, give them a good boost to start, and then let the soil fertility go down over the years as the plants get established and then become long-term in a kind of a forest soil ecosystem where you're not cultivating, you're not fertilizing very much, you're just applying a top dressing of mulch every year or two. And I'll talk a lot about mulch later because it's really, really important. But you can start to get the feel of, here we went from a no man's land to, okay, here are some places for people and here are some places for plants together. Next slide, as we continue to move into the front of the property, we started to melt and reshape that yucky retaining wall, loosen, and we actually did have to export some of those compacted subsoils in order to make room for good soil. A lot of this was construction backfill, and significantly started bouldering up the ground and then bringing our soils in and making a home for the plants that were going in next. And here you can see we continued to sculpt the topography with new soils, and you can see the hardscape going in. We started to create a new fire pit zone off toward the water side of things. And I started to bring in the architectural plants. In this case, they were a variety of conifers, dwarf and intermediate size only, so they'll never get gigantic. And you starting to get a sense of an open enclosure of the space to create this new dwelling zone. Okay, so then we started to populate around the architectural plants with our large shrubs, and grasses, and subshrubs, and perennials, and ground covers, and bulbs. And then we mulched with 4 inches of arborist wood chips, which I will go into later. You can start to see the dynamic plantings coming into shape in the upper right, and how much color and texture there is in there. And down the bottom right, you can start to see how happy these plants are in this place and how many grasses there are. Notice the grasses. Here we go with some before and afters. This is the same slope on the left. Poor Linda had tried some hellebores, which were trying valiantly in that tight soil, and we just took those out and replanted them in this gorgeous new home. You can see here in this garden a dwarf pine in the foreground. You can see Daphne. You can see the ground cover euphorbia. You can see carex. You can see tree heather. You can see a berberis concord, which is one of my favorites. There are a whole bunch of tiny grasses that you can't see yet. There's rosemary. There's Agarria elliptica in there. There's a whole bunch of Mahonia charity, which is a variety of Mahonia I use a ton of. It gets to about 8 feet tall. It's got a really strong vase shape and big bold leaves, and the hummingbirds just love the flowers and the robins love the berries. And those are one of my primary architectural plants that I love to use. Yeah, so you can get a sense of the biodiversity that I'm really aiming to have happening in here. There's Melissa Keller, who's been my awesome lead gardener in KaBloom, and she's a wealth of knowledge and experience and a huge amount of enthusiasm, and I'm so grateful for her. And there's Randy up there in the corner finishing up some details with the soil. Another before and after. This is the same zone, and it just feels completely different. Yeah, it's just really exciting to see. This is before we mulched. This is that same zone a little further on. After mulching, you can see we created a little barbecue zone in there and organized the space a little bit. So it's now a place where you can actually just kind of hang out and have your glass of wine while you're hanging out with your plants. Maybe grab a sprig of rosemary for your grill. So upper left is before, bottom is our new fire pit with plantings around it. You can see we sort of sculpted the ground slightly to raise up a little bit around the flat dwelling zones. The plants are all tiny now, but when they mature, they will cover the ground almost entirely. And on that hillside, we planted over the edge quite a few plants that will prevent erosion while flowering for pollinators and giving food to birds. And then in the upper right, you can see our awesome team member, Blake Beal, installing the hardscape. He's just an incredible craftsman. So lucky to have him. And you can see around the dimensional papers, we decided to integrate some more natural flagstones to sort of bring in the organic shapes into the flat plane as well. And this is the view from above. Like I said, you know, the plants are tiny right now, but in a couple of years, they will pretty much, you won't see the ground, but it will have still a sense of order and rhythm and composition. Now might be a good time to mention the mulch that I really love to use, and I know that this has been echoed by Linda Chalker-Scott about the superiority of using arborist wood chips. I use about a layer of 3 to 4 inches deep in new plantings, and wood chips are just the best. They create a heterogeneous environment at the soil level that allows water to percolate through while retaining moisture, whereas bark kind of mats down. Have you guys ever noticed that about bark? It mats down and actually creates a hydrophobic layer. Wood chips never do that. Wood chips have been shown to promote the growth of the white mycelia that are really beneficial to soil ecology, to roots, uptake of nutrients in the soil. It's really not about just the nutrients in the soil, it's about the biological activity. that's happening that allows the nutrients to be taken up by plants. So arborist wood chips, you can get them, I get them at Orcas Biomass, which is a subset of Rain Shadow Consulting, fabulous company on the island. And so when you think about creating projects around your house, if you want to do some landscape design around your house, I just wanted to pull this all back to what it means to you guys. So I would encourage DIY plant compositions. And here's what I would say. I would say find a place outside where you want to sit. And if it's not already a sitting place, turn it into one. It could be right outside your front door under your overhang. You could clean up the mess, put some chairs, and then start planting around it. Bring plants up close. You could bring grasses up close. You could bring hellebores up close. You could bring fern and mahonia up close. And use a bowl of beauty approach, which is something I meant to talk about, but haven't talked about much, where when you're sitting, you have a flat space that is this place for human beings to sit, and have your chairs. And then as you move out from that space, you graduate the heights of the plants upward as they go away from you. So you actually feel like you're sitting in a bowl of beauty. This is a term I learned from Anne Lovejoy, who's a well-loved Pacific Northwest organic garden guru. So you could keep that in mind. And so this is really about creating coziness outside. So you're actually outside of your home, you're in your environment, there's a place to be, and then you create coziness by bringing our plant friends around you. So find a place to make a zone, construct your substrate, could be a deck, could be a wood chip zone with chairs, could be a fire pit, and then sit there and think about what you want to see around you and start bringing plants in, and just start small and grow out. Let's see what's next. Oh, I wanted to talk about some of the non-nature sources of my learnings. First is this book, Plant-Driven Design. I use it like crazy. Written by the Ogdens out of Colorado. It's really a wonderful treatise on designing gardens that honor plants, place, and spirit. So it's very appropriate to hear. The next one is Pete Udolph, who Margaret Payne introduced me to, and thank you, Margaret, changed my life. Pete Udolph is a Dutch designer who has really heralded a beautiful movement toward naturalistic planting patterns. And they're just super appropriate to our ecosystem here. And I've read many of his books and took a course with him. Just love him so much. The other book is A Pattern Language, which is really more of an architectural book, but anybody who loves building spaces should have this book. It's really amazing. It's thick, it's like a Bible, and it's endlessly fascinating. That's that. Oh, I wanted to talk about this, this awesome recipe for DIY alfalfa pellet compost that I came across from the Rodale Institute. And if you Google Rodale alfalfa pellet compost, write that down, you will come across the article that's in the upper right of the screen there. And it's really interesting and really informative, and we can all use it in our veggie gardens and to put around plants that are not looking so good. It just really gives a boost of biologically active, nitrogen-rich compost easy to make, that only takes a shovelful or two of your own home compost and just makes it bionic. And then wood chips for mulch. I already talked about that. So if anybody has any questions, we can do that in the Q&A. And I would just close by saying, you know, plants help humans, right? We all know that. That's why we live here, and that's why we garden. And the more we can bring plants into our intimate home spaces, the better we're going to feel, the more we're going to ease the difficulty of what it is to live as a human being. We're all really aware of what that's like right now. It's kind of always been that way, and maybe it won't always be that way, but plants are here to help us and, you know, remind us of the reality that we're really in. We're part of something much, much bigger. And the more we can be aware of that, the better off we'll all be. So with that, I will say thank you very much. And I guess we'll go into the question and answer period.
I don't have any questions so far.
Okay.
I suspect that everyone is very busy taking in what you've said.
There's a lot to take in.
Oh,
I know.
there is. I think what keeps resonating with me is what you said about exuberance of life. Is there anything that you want to elaborate on with that?
Yes, very much so. Well, you know, I just took a trip to Mexico City. And this might seem a little bit of a non sequitur, but I was amazed by the culture of Mexico City. First of all, everybody was wearing masks. And second of all, everybody was out living. And there was an afternoon I spent in a park in Mexico City where I just was sitting there watching everybody, and there was just a buzzing with activity all around me. People playing soccer and salsa dancing and doing hip hop and riding bikes and singing and dancing. And I just thought, this is an ecosystem. This is an energetic ecosystem, and there is an exuberance of life here. And this is no different from an exuberance of life in a garden. And so I just, it feeds everybody to be part of an exuberance of life. And so for me to be able to bring that kind of a feeling into somebody's home garden is a real honor. And I think it's really important because it just feeds everybody. It not just feeding the people, it's feeding the whole ecosystem. Including but not limited to the energetic ecosystem of being a human being. Okay, I'm seeing some pictures here. I have some chats.
Yes, that's right. So Anita starts, with what are some of your favorite grasses? And then someone else is asking which grasses to avoid that might be invasive.
Okay, let's see. My favorite grasses. My favorite tall, upright grass is Calamagrostis Carl Forster. That's Calamagrostis, and then Carl with a K, Forster. They're at the library. They are flanking the library sign. They just stay upright all year round. We just cut them back. They're a cool season grass, so they'll flush out, then they'll send up their flowers, and then the flowers tighten up and become golden, and just stay that way till you cut them down again. My other favorites are miscanthus grasses. although those do require a little more water. They're not super drought tolerant. They're from Japan, but they have this beautiful fountainy full growth, and they're bigger in stature. They can be 5 to 6 feet tall. Smaller varieties are maybe 4 feet tall, and there are a bunch of those planted at the library as well. Another favorite is Pennisetum hameln, Hameln. It's a fountain grass, beautiful, beautiful grass. Google that and take a look at it. My other favorite that I used very much of at the library and that does beautifully on orchis is Mexican feathergrass. And I will say that it can be a little messy. It has seed heads that go everywhere, and they can sprout and kind of spread. So sometimes I wonder, should I be using a grass that spreads like this? But on the other hand, it does so beautifully and it fits the bill so well that I just keep using it. It's the one that just sways like effortlessly in the breeze, and it's just too gorgeous not to use. So if you have really fertile soils, you might want to stay away from that one because it might go everywhere. But if you have fertile soils, then you might want to use miscanthus. So those are some of my absolute favorite grasses.
And then I'm sorry, yeah, invasives, yes. Touch on the invasives, and then folks want to know about plant sources.
I don't really have any cautions about invasive grasses. Yeah, because all the grasses that I'm talking about are clumping grasses. None of them are invasive. So besides the Mexican feather grass sometimes wanting to spread. But besides that, I don't have any cautions.
And then where do you get your plants?
Well, I get all my plants from the mainland. I am really excited to be using, what's the company? Digging Dog Perennials. I'm really looking for sources for plants that don't use so much plastic, but I'm really plant shopping at nurseries on the mainland, and they're mostly wholesale nurseries in the Skagit Valley and down near Seattle. I have to search around a lot for the plants that I want because I use such a variety, but I just can't say enough good stuff about Christensen's nursery. They just have a huge variety of wonderful plants, and I know we all just go crazy when we go there. So that's what I would say. Go to Christensen's.
Okay. And then someone asked about any grasses you don't have to cut back.
Okay, sedges. Oh, sedges are a really important grass. You don't have to cut back sedges, and because they're evergreen, and they actually sometimes resent being cut back. There are sedges that you should cut back. There's a huge family of grasses, but in general, sedges are the most wonderful for not cutting back. They tend to be small. I used a lot of them on the hillside stairway plantings at the library. That would be Carex, Testaceae, Prairie Fire, I think was the one I used in there. So that would be my answer to that question. What else?
The bowl of beauty concept. Could you speak a little more about the bowl of beauty concept?
Sure. So you just imagine yourself sitting in the bottom of a bowl, and your view is the sides of the bowl. Your view is everything you can see, and you know it's easy to have a beautiful view of the water if you've got a waterfront place. But what about the view of your own property? And so you can actually build up layers of things to look at up the sides of your bowl. And so you're not blocking your view of small things by planting big things. If you plant big things right up close to you, you feel kind of walled in. But if you plant the big things further away from you, then you feel spacious but held. And then the little things make sense around you. You can look down at them, you can touch them, but they give you room. And then as you move out, you can see everything as you move toward the higher sides of your space. Does that make sense?
I think so. And two more. One is someone would like to plant beneath fruit trees. Any experience or suggestions for that? Obviously, it needs to be hardy, drought resistant, and need to be able to harvest around the trees.
Right. I think so. And fruit trees are creating some shade. I would think that a little field of maybe some grasses with bulbs, maybe under fruit trees would be a beautiful way to go, because you don't really, want to compete with the fruit tree. The fruit trees are kind of this simple, beautiful view. So I would keep things low. I could see a little field of carex grasses with maybe some snowdrops or different bulbs for springtime beauty. And then, what's the plant? I always forget its name. The one that you can chop down and use for compost. It does beautifully around fruit trees, and it's actually part of in the permaculture mindset, it's in a guild with fruit trees. Can anybody remember the name? Comfrey. Thank you. Yes, comfrey is a beautiful thing to have massed under fruit trees, although comfrey can become a bit of a monster as well, but it's a good monster.
And the last question we have is, what locally sourced amendment would you recommend? This person doesn't really want Nutrimulch because of its high percentage of nitrogen and can't find regular compost on island.
Okay, well, first of all, I would recommend making that alfalfa pellet concoction. And second of all, I would definitely recommend getting some biochar. I forgot to mention this earlier, but this is another product that really deserves its own whole seminar, I think. I feel like there should be a seminar on soils and biochars and mulches. Biochar is available through Rain Shadow Consulting, same place where you can get the Arborist wood chips. It's kind of a miraculous product, and there's a lot more to know about it, but I would recommend Googling biochar and seeing what you can learn, and then getting some and incorporating that into your soil. It's kind of a miracle thing, and it's made locally as well.
And I think that was it for questions. Did I miss anyone? All right, then I guess we'll hand it back to Lena, Dixie, and Nita.
Okay. Emily, thank you so much. And Carol, thank you for moderating. Emily, there are two names that you brought up that sort of lead into other things. Margaret Payne is going to be talking to us next month. And I know we're in for a visual feast of what's happening in her garden. And then John Christensen from Christensen's Nursery is talking to us in January. So I couldn't resist saying that because you just said those names, but thank you so much. I have this long list of things that I need to follow up with, and I just learned so much and really, really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm honored too and thrilled. Thank you.
Good. And then Dixie.
Hello, everybody. Well, you've given me something to think about and to do. Emily, I so appreciate your giant lens on biodiversity. And as we all know, gardening really is a sport for optimists. We have certainly learned that. But also thank you for the concept of the beauty bowls. I'm going to go out and sit in the forest and see what I can do with what I currently have. And your talk was just elegantly presented. I so appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap up our program now. As everyone else has said, thank you so much, Emily. It's so wonderful. I have a couple of takeaways. Well, I have a whole 2 pages of notes of takeaways, but a couple of things that really resonated for me personally were in the beginning when you were talking about nature is the best designer, and bringing this. I love this thought, bringing civilized zones into conversation with surrounding wildness. I love that idea of this softening the edges between what we create and our sort of civilized gardens, but softening that edge to move out into the bigger natural world and blending in rather than creating 2 separate, really different looking kind of zones. I love that idea. So
Good job.
so much to think about and learn and explore. And just thank you so much for coming. Don't forget, on Saturday, the Lopez Garden Club is hosting Christina Pfeiffer talking about a drought resilient garden. And then, of course, next month we'll have Margaret Payne with us. So thank you all. Now it's time to go out and enjoy this beautiful day. Hope you get your hands really dirty in the dirt. Bye-bye.
Thank you.